We're going to get started. As you know, the topic of this webinar is remembering in real time. We felt, like many other organizations, that this time of year is very, very loaded, complicated for educators. We are almost at the 1-year anniversary of October 7th, and we are asking ourselves a lot of questions about how we should tackle that day in our schools, in our educational settings, and what can we bring as educators to our learners when almost a year has gone by from the devastating day of October 7th, and of course, everything else that has unfolded since then. So what are we going to do together today? I'm going to open with a short overview of the National Library of Israel, for those of you who might be less familiar. And then we'll talk a little bit about how or when experience becomes memory. Then we'll have breakout rooms where you will have an opportunity to speak to another two people from the group and kind of share a little bit of your experiences and also learn together some texts around memory. And when we come back from the breakout rooms, we'll kind of share a few insights, and I will present a few practical ideas on what you can perhaps do with your learners as October 7th approaches or after during the year. And we'll also talk a little bit about a documenting project that's underway in the library called Bearing Witness. So before we actually get started, I wanted to start with two little things, two little thoughts. One is to ask you to share what gives you hope these days. I think that this whole issue of how do we start commemorating something that's still happening, we're all part of some kind of circle of some kind of circle of tragic events that either more directly or maybe more removed from what happened on October 7th or everything that's happened since then. And I think we're all trying to hang on to hope. And I think as educators, we also don't have the privilege to stop hoping. We need to also give our students, our learners, some hope these days. So I'm inviting everyone to share in the chat one thing that these days is giving you hope. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so that I can also see the chat and take a second to look. So if you could share in the chat something that gives you hope these days, it would be really great. So our students coming together, thank you, Stephanie. And people are welcome to share. It could be a person, it could be a text, it could be the resilience of Israeli relatives and friends. Thank you. Meeting other educators. Okay, so I'm gonna let you continue sharing. Amazing knowledge of Jewish history, knowing that we've been through these things before, we can never be defeated, that there are others who are going through the same thing, feeling of community. So keep it coming, and you guys can kind of look at what other people are also sharing. And in the meantime, I'm also going to point out another thing I wanted to kind of put out there in the beginning is I think one of our biggest challenges in this time, also on a personal level, but also on an organizational level, was what is it that we can contribute? What is it that we can do to make a difference? And I can say that one of the things I'm going to present to you today from the things that the National Library of Israel is doing is really how we can contribute and how we can bring something that's very much the National Library of Israel to the situation. We're very well aware that we're not the first responders. We don't offer, of course, psychological help or medical help or other types of support in the community. So what is it that, in this example, can the National Library of Israel provide to the community that can help people get through this difficult time? So I'm inviting all of you to also kind of have that in mind. And I think that's something that can also strengthen us, is to really take a moment to think about what you as an individual or as part of a community or in your organization can really contribute so that you feel during this time that whatever it is that you're doing, whatever it is that you've chosen to do is meaningful, is significant, and you're really making a difference. So in that note, I want to just explain a little bit about the National Library of Israel. We are the prime institution for preserving national memory, and we serve all populations in Israel as well as all of the communities of the Jewish world. And one of our biggest challenges is not only to preserve the cultural and historical items that we collect, but it's also to pass them on to the next generations. And that's where you educators come into the picture. So in general, what we do is we offer professional development and educational resources based on the treasures at NLI. And we work in multiple languages, and some of you are already familiar with all of these materials and are already using them. In general, what we believe in is using primary sources to learn, to get an authentic glimpse into the past, to ask questions. And we really believe and see how students can really connect and get creative when they are in touch with direct items, direct documents from historical times, and not just learning about these things from a textbook or from far removed quotes or explanations. So the skills that we try to promote in everything we do, and also now in these resources I'll present to you today around October 7th, are these skills that we believe serve students not only for studying about Israel and about their Jewish identity, but in general, in anything that they might pursue as learners. I just want to give you a glimpse into some of the things that the library has done over this time. There is what is a photograph of the National Library of Israel in its new building that we moved into mid-October last year. Of course, without the grand opening that we planned, but we nevertheless decided to move into the building, and we're so happy we did, because it since then has served as a space for so many people to come and gain strength and hope and share and knowledge and meet with each other. There is a small exhibit of chairs that present a book that represents every hostage, and it's called Every Hostage Has a Story. Also, in the beginning of the war, we served populations that were evacuated from their homes by bringing a mobile bookmobile to different to children who were, again, misplaced from their homes. Some of them are still not back in their homes, and the idea was to give them a moment to read a book, to have some quality time with themselves, with their friends, and learn something new, despite the situation. Another thing that we did was we invited kids from all over the world, and again, some of you have actually participated in this, to send us letters, and we shared those letters with soldiers and with families in Israel to give them some strength and some words of consolation and of inspiration. So now I kind of, before we go to the breakout rooms, I want to kind of think a little bit together about this concept of memory. When does something I'm experiencing actually become a memory? I just want to mention that everything you're seeing here, including the presentation I'm using, will be shared with you later in an email. And so you'll have all the links. So don't worry about screenshotting and all of that. And of course, if there are people who couldn't join this session live, we're going to be sharing the recording. So when does experience become memory? I want to suggest a way of framing of how to look at how we make meaning of our experiences. Of course, this isn't the only way to look at it, but I'm focusing again mostly on our added value as the National Library of Israel. We collect and we document history. We document people's experiences. And at the point of documenting, you really collect everything. You don't decide what's more important or less important. There's no hierarchy. It could be something that someone scribbled to themselves, or a draft of something they, in the end, didn't end up actually publishing or sending. But that's just as valuable sometimes, or sometimes even more valuable than an official document or a newspaper article. So we really do collect everything. But as a second stage, we want to start processing what we've documented or categorizing it. And also on an individual level, I think that for many of us, in the beginning, experiences are something that are very kind of inclusive, and we can't make sense of everything. But then there's the point of processing where we can start reflecting and start thinking about the emotional aspects. and also making sense of what we're experiencing. Ultimately, the collective memory is formed when we start deciding as a society or as a community what it is that we want to remember. We want to start giving names to things that we're experiencing. We'd like to maybe make connections to previous events or use certain structures that already exist in order to kind of make meaning out of what it is that we're going through. And one of the main things that happens is that we also start building rituals. So you can see that we go from the personal to the collective. And in this slide, I just wanted to kind of maybe try to illustrate how collective memory is kind of this movement between creating a story and maybe using rituals, sometimes existing rituals already. But a lot of it, especially in Judaism, is linked to a specific date, meaning we have to decide when we are commemorating or remembering something. It's not enough to have the story and the ritual. And as most of you are probably familiar with the story of Pesach, that even as it's happening in Egypt, the people of Israel are already commanded to create the Pesach Ledorot, the Pesach that will be remembered later, even in the moment they're actually experiencing it. So I think in many ways that's what we're kind of going through now, where we're experiencing, but at the same time, we're already thinking about how we want to remember it. So I want to talk a little bit about saving the date and why in Judaism it's so significant to anchor this memory in a calendar. This is one of the topics you'll have an opportunity to learn about and talk about in the breakout rooms in a moment. One of the questions that comes up, and you'll see in the source sheet, is should we be using an existing date or should we create a new one? Around October 7th, a lot of questions, as you know, in Israel are, should it be commemorated on October 7th or on Simchat Torah? Should we be maybe using Tisha B'Av, which is the day that we commemorate all of the tragic events in Jewish culture? Maybe we should just use that date as it already exists. What are the pros and cons of that? And you'll see in the source sheets that was actually a question that came up after the Holocaust, whether or not there should even be Yom HaShoah or it should just be linked to Tisha B'Av. And the question of how we're commemorating the date now, 1 year from the event of October 7th, versus what we're going to do for generations. And I want to make a suggestion to all of you educators out there. Let's kind of just focus right now on this year and not burden ourselves with the questions of, wait a second, but if we're doing it this way this year, what does that mean? Are we creating a tradition? And I think that tension of being able to say this year we might do it one way and we have to maybe reconsider things in a year from now, that's totally, I think, legitimate and important. And of course, like I mentioned before about Pesach, we have to create our story. And we'll look at, you'll look into some texts that have to do with that. And we'll also, some of the ideas I'm going to give you to use with your students are connected to that. So I'm going to send you out to breakout rooms so that you have enough time to also kind of delve into the text. In the breakout rooms, what you'll be doing is we'll divide you into groups of 3 people so that you have an opportunity to also introduce yourself and then kind of dive into some text. We're sharing the source sheet that we're going to be using in the chat box in a moment, and it also actually appears in our website. So Liba is going to share with us right now in the chat so that you can use it. And then we're also going to go into breakout rooms where, again, I'm inviting you all to, first of all, introduce yourself, give a little bit of context, and then to dive into the source sheet. You'll have about 15 minutes for the Chevruta learning. Okay, so let's, it would be great if there were maybe 1 or 2 volunteers who want to share some little idea or insight that came up in your group, not in detail, but just kind of a brief a point that you want to kind of share with everyone here in the group. That would be great, 1 or 2 people. So you can either raise your hand or just unmute yourself for the moment, and we'd love to hear a couple of comments.
Okay, so should we all speak if no one's speaking? I think memory is also responsibility. So what we choose to remember will give us a responsibility for how we respond and the programs we run in the future. So if we only remember the tragedies, that leaves us with a certain narrative going forward. If we can synthesize tragedy, with the bravery, with the heroism, then we're not just remembering the past, but we're allowing us to build something more substantial or solid for the future. So we can't just remember and be stuck. Think about, you mentioned Tisha B'Av. We start the morning on the floor, and at a certain point, we get off the floor and we stand up. And that's not only phew, we've finished the kinot, but it's symbolic of that need to stand up. And I think we need to do the same with October the 7th, to be low, but then to stand and to make sure the narrative emboldens us for the future.
Amazing. Thank you, Benji. Does someone else want to share something that came up maybe in your group? Stephanie, yeah.
I'm happy to share. So it was me and Michaela, and we had a fascinating conversation about her work as an educator for high school students in her town in Romania, which is a small town, and has a very, very small Jewish community, like tiny. And her experience going to Yad Vashem and like her dedication to teaching these students about the Holocaust the Shoah in their town, and the different ways that she,
Which town?
Let me see if I could say this correctly. 1 second. Tekush. Did I say it right? Tekuch. And just actually like the way that she's taking her students outside to visit places and asking them to ask their grandparents what they remember, is just incredible. And 15 minutes was not long enough to have this amazing conversation. So I look forward to hopefully continuing this one.
Great. So that's thank you, Stephanie. And I think in general, part of the idea of these kinds of webinars are also for people here to connect, and feel free also in the chat, you guys can connect to each other and then also keep in touch afterwards. That's exactly one of the goals of these kinds of webinars. I'm sure there's a lot of other things we can unpack, and there are a lot of things in the source sheet that you can look at later again and kind of think what would be best suited for your learners. But again, the idea is to explore these questions of memory. What does it mean when we choose a certain date? What is the message that we're sending? Is it too early to choose a date now and to start commemorating? Or is it actually something that we can start doing now? What I want to show you now and what I want to present to you now is a few directions with some practical ideas on how maybe you would like to think about this with your students and how to frame it for them. And again, anything here, and everyone is welcome to also be in touch with us moving forward if you want to hear more about these ideas. But I'm kind of going to go through a few suggestions. So we said that we're talking about memory and how the experience becomes a collective memory. And Benji also said how that's part of our responsibility is to think about how we're going to do that. So I want to make a few practical suggestions. First of all, one idea is to create a timeline with your students. We know that also for individuals who have to process some kind of trauma or some kind of experience, telling the story and making a timeline in a way. And our suggestion is to also do something similar with students around October 7th. It's not to say that they would create a timeline of the events of October 7th, but rather something more personal, something that they remember maybe from the past year in perspective. It helps us make order when there's confusion, and it also gives us a sense of perspective. Like the time is passing and we can look back at certain things that when they were happening, they were very overwhelming. I just want to show you something that we initiated here in Israel for students in Israel. It's called Shnei Regaim, 2 moments, where we invited students to kind of pinpoint 2 moments in time that tell their story about October 7th. It didn't have to happen on the day itself, but rather during this time since October 7th until today. And again, we'll send this link in a separate email so that you can take a look at what the kids have shared. But it's just remarkable to see what children went through and what they want to share in terms of creating their narrative and their story and how important that is. So you can create a class timeline or a school timeline, but you can also have each child create a timeline with maybe 2 or more points of reference. And again, that gives some kind of meaning and stability and this sense of continuity with what we have experienced before and what we will experience after. Another idea is the idea of rewriting ancient text. So in advance of this session, I sent you a really beautiful, I think, a video of Yagel Harush basically performing a kina that he wrote, a lamentation that he wrote about Be'eri. And it based on traditional kinot, the same tunes, the same patterns. And we see a lot of communities that have created modern kinot to address what's happening today. And they've been sung not only on Tisha B'Av, but throughout this year. And we see how powerful that is. And what I want to suggest to you is also with your students to use patterns that can help them make sense of what's going on and gain a sense of meaning and connection to our tradition. So here is something we also hold at the National Library of Israel. And it's a very, very old lamentation from the time of the expulsion from Spain. And what I want to suggest is that you could do something of the sort also with your students. Now, what does that mean? We don't want the students necessarily to be writing a kina, a lamentation, but I want to show you examples of letters that we received from students when in that initiative I was telling you about, words can make a difference. And in some schools, the teachers chose to use this acrostic so that the kids all had to use the word hope in this case from this primary school in the UK, and kind of use the letters HOPE to write something meaningful. And each student, as you can see, used it a little differently, but I think it gave some structure and some stability to this exercise in a way that also can offer, I think, some strength and consolation sometimes. So also we see this in a school from France, the letters of Israel. So I want to show you that this idea of using an acrostic is not foreign to, obviously, to Jewish tradition. And even in Megillat Eicha, the scroll of the Lamentations that we read on Tisha B'Av, it's organized by the Aleph Bet. So this is the first chapter, and you can see that Pasuk Aleph starts with an Aleph, Pasuk Bet starts with a Bet, and so forth until the letter Taf. And there are exactly 22 verses in this chapter. And it goes throughout the entire Megillah, the entire book of Lamentations. And I think the idea is that even in the face of the state instruction, the ABC, the Aleph Bet, the structures that we're familiar with can give us strength and can give us some kind of stability. So it's a really great, I think, exercise either to do the Aleph Bet itself or to choose a word that kids can kind of write a poem or something based on the acrostic. Another idea, and this is this also in the presentation, the video of Yagel Harush. Another idea is to think about memory as resilience. So what strength can we draw from the past, not only in cultural structures or dates that give us some kind of anchor, but rather think of the stories told in the past and experienced in the past. So one of my suggestions to you is that perhaps this is an opportunity to interview community members or parents or grandparents, not about what they experienced this past year, but maybe experiences that they've had when they were younger, things that they've gone through, things that they've overcome, and the way they practice their own resilience as younger adults or children even. And we can really draw inspiration and strength from their testimonies. And so I think part of being resilient, and this is a word that we speak about a lot this year, is knowing what are the resources that we have, either personal or communal or cultural, that we really can draw strength from. And I think that this is a great opportunity to learn the stories of the older members of our communities. So that's another invitation to you as educators to somehow incorporate an activity that either interviews or writes or documents stories of other members of the community. Again, not necessarily, but rather stories from the past. I love this quote by Rabbi Bukhdal. She said this in a sermon during COVID, actually. This isn't from now, it's from 2020. And it really resonated with me, and it's also in the source sheet. And on a personal note also, I feel like over this past year, one of the things that has help me stay strong and resilient is really drawing on the texts that we have and the liturgy and the rituals that are so strong. And it feels like she writes, it feels like they are speaking to me more than ever in this moment, because actually this isn't unprecedented. We've been here before. And I think this feeling of we have sources that we can draw strength from and inspiration from, and also maybe some answers to some of the very difficult questions we're asking, even if there are some questions that are still open. Now, just as we close, we have another 10 minutes till the end of the session, and I would like to talk to you a little bit about this project called Bearing Witness that the library has taken upon itself to document October 7th, its aftermath in Israel and in Jewish communities worldwide. With us in the session is my colleague Timna Abramov. She's here in the crowd. And she's going to kind of walk us through some of the aspects of this project, and also explain how you can also take action and be involved in this very important project. So I'm handing it over to now.
Okay, so I'll start by saying briefly, you've already been told just now by Shulvi, but Bearing Witness is the project that we're taking on ourselves to document the experience of Jewish people both in Israel and abroad, which is many of you guys, to understand how this time has affected you. And I think sometimes when I say that I do this with people, they often think, well, why the diaspora? I mean, they weren't hit by terrorists. There were no rockets going into Italy or England or anything like that. But I think that everyone here knows that that's not fully true. Because while there was no physical attack by a terrorist group, what happens in Israel doesn't really stay in Israel. And when things happen over here, there's a seismic effect that can be felt all over the world. Whether it's the rise in anti-Semitism, whether it's concern for people who were here, family members or friends, or someone that you met a long time ago and have lost contact with. There's one thing that I found so far, it's that pretty much every Jewish person abroad was affected by this in some way or another. Now, when it comes to documenting October 7th, I mean, I think I don't have to go too far into why it's so important. We're a very memory-based culture, and we've had this entire talk about how we should incorporate memory into our kind of daily lives to kind of make our identity crystallized. But when we do document it, what I've often found is that there is so much emphasis on the Israeli experience. And there are so many initiatives that will do that. I can think on top of my head, there have been probably 3 or 4 really, really high budget, really, really detailed projects that literally second by second go into what happened at the Nova massacre or what happened in Otif Aza. That can tell you at 6:21 in Be'eri, this girl ran away from, really to that extent. But there are actually very, very few projects that work on a large scale on the Jewish diaspora. And I have to say, sometimes I get a bit jealous of my colleagues that work in the Israel department of this, because they have such a wealth. And the reason they have such a wealth is because everyone is working together to commemorate. And that's what I want us to do together. I want us to work together and pull in all the resources that we have and commemorate together, so that in the future, our children and their children and their children are not going to have to wonder what the experience of their forebears were. They'll be able to know. Memory is so tricky. It's so short. I think some of us have already kind of half forgotten what it was like to be around on that first week after the massacre. And documentation is useful because it kind of keeps everything alive for us. In a way, it remains unchanged. We change, our opinions change, our feelings change. But the documentation stays exactly as it was. So we have some examples over here. We have hostage posters. We have this lovely Hebrew document, which is basically a point of collection for donations for soldiers. And in general, I don't like giving too many examples when I discuss what there is to collect, because I worry that it's going to make people think that that's what we have to collect, when actually we're so open to a diverse range of sources. But we find so many different things. We find prayers that were written for hostages. We find recordings of prayers that were said for hostages. We find, you know, wonderful artistic responses, musical, you know, painting and so on, and actually many from children. I think when I'm thinking about what you specifically have to offer me, to offer the project, I actually think about how you have this incredible access to how young minds have been processing this. But you also have access to the heart of a community when you're part of a school. So I want you guys to think about whether perhaps at the beginning of October 7th, whether you maybe had a time where your school shut down. Was there a newsletter that was sent home? Or were there any children who made artwork that you could show us? And these are the kinds of questions that I think we have to stop, right, Shulvi?
No, you have another minute or two. Yeah, it's okay. I'm gonna just share in the chat the link to the, yeah.
Okay, sure. The documentation that you have is really essential because it shows the response of both the community and an individual. It shows the response both on a kind of a institutional level, but also on the personal level. And that's really extremely valuable. So I'm gonna tell you how to collect, first of all. When you have a source, and by the way, don't worry too much about whether it's the right kind of source. We want to see it no matter what, so just send it in. I personally like to get as many personal as many personal emails in basically as I possibly can. So you have my email on the slide. If you have any questions, whether it's regarding your material, whether it's regarding privacy, or if you have a story or a lead, I would really, really like to hear it. Now, if on the other hand, you have something which is quite small, just a few photos, nothing that you think is too serious, then you can send it in through the form, which is accessible through a barcode that we have on the slide as well. But as a general rule, I really do like to get all these wonderful questions from you and from your communities. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there because we are quite short on time. And if you guys have any questions, then feel free.
Thank you so much, Timna. And I think, again, this is just the beginning of the connection. We're going to send you an email with this presentation. You'll have Timna's email, which we can also now put in the chat. And again, the idea is not to think too much, to send in anything that you think might be relevant, because ultimately, we're going to be able to tell the story. And we talked about how we're creating the story and what we're thinking about, what it is that we're going to remember for generations. That is heavily relied on you and on your sharing. And the more narratives and the more documents and the more stories we have from all over the world, the more accurate and full the narrative of this episode in Jewish history will be. And the National Library of Israel is working, like Timna said, with hundreds of organizations and volunteers, etc. We're serving as an umbrella for this. And so if you also have a connection to anything or anyone who might be documenting independently, it's worth putting them in touch with us. So I just want to summarize, and I'm also happy for people to maybe write quickly in the chat if there's a question or something that they kind of are left with, or a thought they're left with from this webinar. Basically, what we did today was, again, in a nutshell, we tried to tackle this idea of how we can start remembering something when we don't really understand if it's over yet. There are elements of the events that we've experienced that are already over, and we can start thinking about them and reflecting about them and trying to make sense of them. But we also appreciate that there are other things that are still unfolding, and we have to kind of muster up some of the strength and courage to continue our work and our important work and still give hope to our students, even in these difficult times. So some of the sources for that is in our culture, we can look at rituals or texts or different patterns of ways that the Jewish culture has tried to preserve memories in the past and pass them on. I'm really encouraging you to look in our website. Again, we'll be sharing all these links. We have multiple source sheets and other resources for you to look at about October 7th that might be useful for you and for your learners. And in the end, you're the educators in the room. You know best what is good for your learners, or what's appropriate, or what is the right thing to kind of the right angle to address what's going on. You don't have to overload them with material or with ideas that are irrelevant. You don't have to feel obligated, I think, to give them everything. You really have to meet them where they are and try to kind of meet their needs. And we're here for you as well. We're here to support you as educators. If you're looking for more materials, if you're looking for more ideas, if you want to be in conversation with other educators as well. So I'm wishing everyone a really, really peaceful and good new year. And we pray that everything that's happening will soon end and we can all kind of go back to our peaceful lives, and hope to meet you in better circumstances in the near future. So thank you, everybody, and we'll be in touch. Shana Tova, everyone.